This presentation will examine the use of three components in motor learning. These components are knowledge of performance, working memory, and whole practice. Knowledge of performance is the feedback given to a person after a skill has been produced. This can be provided in a number of ways, such as verbal feedback, photos, or video recordings. Knowledge of performance is an important factor in motor learning, as it focuses on the process of the skill. This technique is important as it ensures the correct execution of the skill, regardless of the outcome. It can also play a role in motivation, which in turn encourages adherence in motor learning activities. If a person becomes too reliant on knowledge of performance, they may actually perform more poorly in situations where feedback is not given. Therefore, knowledge of performance should be moderated to prevent this. However, the benefits of using this type of feedback outweigh the disadvantages, especially in learners during the cognitive and early associative stages of learning. Here is an example situation of using knowledge of performance during motor learning. A coach tells a volleyball player to raise their elbow and keep the ball in front of the player before they spike. Here is an example situation of using knowledge of performance during motor learning. A coach tells a volleyball player to raise their elbow and keep the ball in front of the player before they spike in order to improve their technique. Showing the player this photo is a good example of reinforcing where and why the athlete needs to improve, as performing with poor technique doesn't allow the player to perform at their full potential. The use of poor technique may also increase the risk of injury for the athlete. In changing the volleyballer's spiking technique, there is less strain on the back to accommodate the larger arc. Knowledge of performance is a critical part of dancing and figure skating, where the marking criteria is subjective and based on the interpretation of the judge. In these sporting instances, the performance is the outcome or goal. Using knowledge of performance, such as video recordings of dance sessions, will not only highlight areas that need to improve, but help assist in the choreography of the dance. The next concept of motor learning to be discussed is working memory. Working memory is often described as short-term memory, as it is based on the here and now, or situational factors. It interplays with procedural and declarative memory systems, also known as long-term memory. As it was just mentioned, there is a high interplay between short and long-term memory, in particular working memory with declarative memory. So there is not often exclusively one memory type being used, despite it being suggested that motor learning can occur independently of working memory. Whereas once a skill has been mastered and procedural and declarative memory have been developed, working memory allows the individual to take in situational factors when performing the task. The experienced individual uses the working memory more to assist in assessing the environment and adapting technique according to the situation. No, it's okay. Yeah. In dribbling and basketball, the working memory is operating with the procedural and declarative memory types in order to learn the skill. Once the skill has been mastered, if an opponent is introduced...
In dribbling a basketball, the working memory is operating with the procedural and declarative memory types in order to learn the skill. Once the skill has been mastered, if an opponent is introduced, the learner doesn't have to focus on ball control. Instead, they are able to use their working memory to take in and respond to situational factors. Driving a car is a skill that requires constant attention, regardless of what stage of learning the individual is in. So even if the skill of driving has been mastered through procedural and declarative memory, the driver is still utilising their working memory to safely navigate the car, observe other traffic, pedestrians and hazards, as well as the state of the road. The third and final motor learning concept to be discussed is whole practice. Whole practice is a motor learning technique where the full skill is executed. Part practice is when the skill is broken down into subcomponents to achieve its learning. There has been much discussion as to what practice method is better for motor learning. However, it has been shown that when learning a motor skill, training method is dependent upon both task complexity and task organisation. This means that whole practice is best applied to skills of low complexity and high organisation, as well as individuals who have reached advanced associative or autonomous learning stages. In using whole practice, the biomechanics of a skill are not compromised, which is particularly important in continuous and serial skills. Running is a great example of when to apply whole practice, as this continuous skill is low in complexity and high in organisation, and practicing the whole skill does not compromise the biomechanics of the movement.
Learning or practicing shooting in netball is another example of where whole practice is more beneficial than part practice. This is due to the simple nature of the task and the consistency in
Learning or practicing shooting in netball is another example of where whole practice is more beneficial than part practice. This is due to the simple nature of the task and the consistency in movement, as well as if the skill were to be practiced without, say, the initial knee flexion. The technique applied will change to find more power in the wrist and arm to shoot the ball. To summarize, knowledge of performance is more beneficial to utilizing the cognitive and associative stages of learning. Working memory can be found in all aspects of motor performance, but more particularly after acquiring a skill. Whole practice should be used in skills that are low in complexity but high in organisation, as well as individuals who have reached advanced stages of the associative or autonomous stages of motor learning. Can't say associative.